name's Connor McLean. I am the co-director and co-writer of Stay Calm.
I am Sam Quinn, co-writer, co-director, and actor also in Stay Calm. Connor's an actor in it too.
I am an actor in it as well.
Did it all.
All right, so what inspired you guys to make Stay Calm?
Sam, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Well, Connor and I had just worked on a project together prior, and then we grabbed a coffee in LA one morning and started talking about the idea of creating a horror film. We were both into horror, but we hadn't created anything of our own. So he came to me with this idea of muted senses, similar to, he brought up the examples of like Bird Box and A Quiet Place, right? And he's like, well, we love those, but what if there was a story where instead of not being able to hear or speak or whatever, you couldn't feel, to where if you emote to a certain level, you are subject to dying or turning into some sort of a monster, right? So that's where it all started, was him pitching that idea, and I loved it. At the time, I was sort of digging fairly deep into all these Zen Buddhist practices and mindfulness and all this, and so I was like, okay, well, instead of that this could work for that idea if instead of like a normal horror action film, the characters have to go through this like rigorous, montage, push-ups, jogging and stuff. They have to do mental conditionings and emotional conditioning to be able to survive, right? So that's why in the movie they're running to calm the nerves, all that kind of stuff. So it was just sort of a mix between some of my ideas thematically and then some of his ideas plot-wise and all of that, and just coming together.
Yeah, that about sums it up. I think most specifically, I think we were excited about. I did love these senses-based films where there's another one where he can't hear you. I can't remember what it's called. I'm just blanking off it. But anyway, it's just such a horrifying idea, that you can't.
Oh, is it Hush?
What is it?
The Hush? Yeah. The slasher.
And there's Hush. There's even another one where they're stuck in a guy's house. But it's just like you're already surviving. We've all seen a lot of different survival scenarios, and what if you didn't have access to one of the most like integral parts of your being? And that just felt like a blank page that almost any type of person and any type of scenario can be thrown into and have to deal with it and find a multitude of different ways, whether it's drugs or mindfulness, to survive those conditions.
So what was the production process like for you guys?
Production, yeah, I mean, neither of us had ever worked as co-directors with anyone else before. Connor, you hadn't, right?
No.
So I think we kind of just touched base on how we were going to go about it. And it was, overall, it went pretty swimmingly, surprisingly, because a lot of people talk about not being able to work with another person as co-directing. But we were on the same page along the way. As far as the writing process goes, I think we were brainstorming story ideas together at first, and then Connor busted out the first draft, and then he would send it to me. We would talk. I might take a stab at a few scenes, shift some stuff around, and that was pretty much it. And then the same thing went with our storyboarding and shot listing and all of that. We were like, well, I have a pretty good idea. I would say I for one didn't have a great grasp on some of the action sequences that he had written, where I was like, I can see what you're going for here. Specifically, I'm talking about when, for people that have seen the film, that whole sequence where it's intercutting between my character being attacked outside while his character is doing his thing upstairs with my wife, right? And how that was going to kind of intercut between. I could kind of see it, but I wasn't sure the shots that he had in mind. So we would really kind of break it off into chunks, where I would say, like, I know these scenes like pretty clear visually in my head what should happen. So I'll take these few scenes and then I'm going to hand it off to you. You take scene 5 to 10, work on those. And then we would come back together and look at it and kind of revise ideas. Does that sound about right, Connor?
Yeah, yeah. The only thing I can add is, you know, it was kind of like, because Sam and I had a we had known each other before back in, like, I don't know, 2005, 2006. We've gone to college together, and but it was almost like, you know, kind of like having your old friend be a roommate. You don't know, you know what I mean? Like, within the first 2 weeks, you're like, this is such a bad idea. And it was kind of miraculous in those ways. I mean, I think we really clicked in a lot of places. I think there's something really exciting about being able to know where your strengths are and aren't. And it's kind of nice when the other person can kind of step into those places. And there's a lot of trust, I think, on each end. And we're also, you know, we've got some things in the works for a feature. And I do think that this was kind of, you know, a good way for us to go, okay, so this, like, works really well, and I think we have a stronger piece because of the two people coming together with the kind of different styles and approaches and stuff like that. So it's kind of been a really cool other piece of the puzzle than just, you know, the already clear difficulties of making a film.
Right. Yeah, it felt a little bit like this was our, you know, because we made it as a concept film, pitch piece for the feature version of it. It was also sort of a pitch piece for us working together, right. And the litmus test of, like, well, okay, and now that we've had that experience, it's like it does feel like we're pretty clear on what strengths Connor fills that are my weaknesses, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what inspires you guys as filmmakers?
So much. There's so much that's inspiring. I love human behavior, watching people, you know, finding yourself in a crowd, which was harder during the pandemic, but you know, we're still in the pandemic, but, you know, like, not being in enclosed spaces with people, you had to look elsewhere, but just, like, hearing interactions between people, and trying to almost guess their relationship, especially if you just hear a couple of words or a couple of sentences. That's always inspiring for me to just kind of get my brain going. All the art forms, photography is a big one for me, and music. Gosh, there's so much, and I don't know. I feel like I'm botching this question because it is a lot. It's like, I feel like I tend to draw inspiration from so many different things. Probably the biggest one, though, is just my personal life, whatever's going on in my life, that I feel like it is resonating to the point that I either need to express it cathartically to get it out of my system, or because I don't know what I'm feeling exactly, so I need to tell the story of it in hopes that I might, you know, heal whatever that is, or figure out whatever that is, and in the process also help someone else relate to that.
I think, you know, filmmaking in general, I mean, I don't think it's unique to a grown up being obsessed with movies and stuff like that, and wanting to be a part of that. And I definitely like working in different genres. Like I like spending certain chunks of my life in these different worlds. Like, obviously there's horror, and then animation, and then historical drama. And I like working in different, and I like to just kind of, you know, submerge into each of those places. And I think that it does, you know, kind of like what Sam said about his personal life. There's something to be said about what you're choosing to focus on, and what it's kind of meeting at the time. And in a funny way, I think horror to me is the most exciting because it's actually probably the least like heady one. I kind of like the strictly visceral aspect of it. I feel like you know, on other stuff I've worked on, it's a lot of trying to figure out these kind of complex emotions and huge, you know, bending twists and plots, and and like just trying to like, you know, encapsulate like this like dramatic human experience. Whereas with horror, while we do, if, you know, in the film, we do want to focus and spend time on interpersonal drama and some other elements. I really like the idea initially of just like going kind of full throttle into like the adrenal system. That's honestly what I think I like the most about horror, is that at times I just want to be kind of forced to experience something very visceral and something that I can feel directly, that like like irrationally affects my sense of safety, you know, while sitting in a movie theater seat, you know. I want to go to a rom-com or make a rom-com and like feel sappy and lovey, and I want to see a drama, but I want to go to a horror and I want to feel like genuine unease for a certain period of time. And so I think when we were talking about doing a horror, I was like, yes, can we please spend time in just this uncomfortable kind of exciting state of like nothing really matters, all we have to do is focus on surviving, which I think is kind of a liberating idea in and of itself, and how that works with the relationships and the people around us and how we navigate that. So I think that was specifically about horror, and of course about Stay Calm, something that really inspired me to work on this genre.
Can I piggyback on that, David?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because I guess, because what was the question? What inspires you for filmmaking? What was it?
Yeah, what inspires you as a filmmaker?
As a filmmaker, yeah. I think maybe I was thinking of it too broadly, but I have found myself attracted to horror for the same reasons that Connor mentioned, and melodrama in general, right? And we're not talking about like soap opera melodrama, but similarly, like horror film is melodrama in so many ways, where you can touch on these big emotions that realism usually just doesn't cover. It's like ordinary people in very unordinary big circumstances, that can also be used as sort of a vessel or a vehicle for metaphor, which you can't do with a lot of the, like, you know, indie dramas. You can, but it's just not quite as, I don't think it packs as much of a punch. So that's always inspiring when I see really good horror, the metaphor behind it all, the bigger message, the bigger theme, packed inside this truly terrifying, high octane, high stakes story. It just seems like the best of two worlds. Like, you can't take your eyes off the picture, and then you walk away from it. And if it's good, if there's, you know, actual like theme there and something meaning behind the story, you walk away being like, oh shit. And it's just like a second hit to the chest, you know, whatever it's about, like family trauma or you know, whatever the theme is, it just hits you even harder, I feel like, than just or it has the potential to hit you even harder than just your straight family drama or something like that.
Interesting. So do you think that horror, this is one of my piggyback questions, since you touched on what you just touched on there, do you think horror is a good genre to learn filmmaking in, like being on set, writing, the act of editing? It builds a lot of skills, obviously, because you have to build tension. If you can't build tension, it's very, very, very difficult to have an effective horror film. And we've spoken to a lot of filmmakers who seem to touch on that exact same vein of, you know, you have to be able to balance, you know, scares with, you know, genuine human drama. Do you find that horror is a good genre to cut your teeth in for newer filmmakers who, you know, maybe don't have a fantastic budget to, you know, get great actors to, you know, be the subjects in their films?
That's a great question. I actually think that, you know, and this is a little bit leaning towards the writing piece too. I think when you're trying to tell a visual story, and I'm guilty of, I'm really guilty of overwriting and overutilizing dialogue and exposition, or, you know, and trying to find ways of like, how can I say this better? How can I say this clearer? And I think horror a little bit forces your hand, right? It doesn't work if it's just like a ton of exposition and dialogue and constant explanations, right? There's so much kind of dead space that you have to fill with visuals. which I think is it's a really good question. I think it's a really great exercise. Certainly with budget, I think we had a small budget for this, but you definitely have to find ways, especially because we wanted to do as little visual effects as possible. So, but you definitely have to cheat and find ways. So you definitely have to get creative on set with how you accomplish those things without it, coming off as like too gimmicky or well, at least for our film. I know there's a lot of comedy and horror, but too gimmicky or too cheesy. But I do think there's something really interesting about telling a story that forces your hand to be visual. And I think that teaches you, especially in the writing process and certainly in the directing process, how to try to simplify your ideas and pinpoint them to give them the most sharp and real effect. Whereas with like a drama, I think the first thing I ever wrote was kind of a dramedy. I kind of just like, vomited all my ideas and just kind of like, and just filled so much page space with trying to kind of get my idea across, and I wasn't forced necessarily to be as visual as something like a horror film.
I agree with some of what Connor just said, but I'll elaborate in that. I think horror. I mean, I guess horror would be. I would agree that horror would be a good genre for a beginning filmmaker to start with, to learn the craft potentially. But it doesn't. I don't think it means that beginning filmmakers will have a better chance at making a good movie by doing horror, right? Because I think horror is actually fairly close to comedy in some ways, and we see that they blend the two a lot. But comedy is all about timing and pacing, right? Knowing where the builds are and where the releases are, and horror is the same way with building tension, suspense, letting it reach a climax, and then letting it fall off. And on a larger picture too, having sequences that are, knowing when to give the audience a break after you've just hit them with like a long sequence of action. If you just hit them, I think that's something that I've seen happen, and it can be overwhelming for an audience if it's just like constant action, constant horror the whole way, and they don't get a chance to breathe and consider and sort of digest what has just happened. You'll just that whole sequence that you just worked so hard on will almost be for nothing. It's like you don't get the payoff, you don't get the release afterwards. So in that way, I think horror is actually, like, horror done well is just as hard as comedy, but I think it is a good experience for indie filmmakers to try to make it, because you can do it on a low budget, right? And you can find one location and make a horror film. And the reason why that works oftentimes is if you have the ability to build the tension and the suspense. You don't need all the other locations. You don't need all the other dialogue. If you even have just a simple plot, but it takes place on one location, and you know how to build the suspense and how to build the connective tissue from one scene to the next, doesn't matter that it's at one location, right? And I think it's also smart for indie filmmakers as far as breaking into for the same reasons for breaking in to the scene, because there is such a large demographic for horror, right? That if they can do a good one, and they can do a good one on a low budget, it's probably the closest guarantee that you can get to a return on investment for a film, is a horror done well on a very low budget, right? And then I would also say that for learning, again, like comedy, if you have these horror sequences, you are forced to be so methodical and plan it out correctly. Otherwise, it just won't work. Just like you have to look at a joke and make sure that the setup will work for the punchline, and if it doesn't work, you have to rework it or whatever. And that's going to take you into the world of editing, of figuring out what kind of editing works best. It just, it covers the base. I think Yes, it is a great genre to hone your skills as a craftsman. Hitchcock is a great example of that, right? Because like he's the master of suspense. Not everyone loves him, but you can't watch like Vertigo or North by Northwest and say like he's not one of the most brilliant craftsmen filmmakers ever, right?
I was just gonna say, and just this last thing about that is, I do think that horror audiences, and I didn't know this necessarily before, but you know, going to some festivals and horror audiences are are the most devoted, legit audiences. You know, they just love horror films. Like, I guess some of the energy I really like about doing like a horror versus like maybe something that's like hyper artsy or whatever else, other genres, is that like there's a strong desire for it to work. I think in a lot of horror audience, like you want to go in and enjoy it. You're not hypercritical necessarily, or picking it apart or going, whatever, I saw that coming. Like the horror audiences that I've experienced just love they want to go on the journey with you. Like the first frame opens and they're like, awesome, let's go. Where are we at? Oh man, we got zombies. Okay, you know, I don't know. I've now like come to like love you know, screening and doing horror films and horror audiences for sure.
Yeah, they're super forgiving and like loving.
Right.
It's just awesome.
Yeah.
But they'll let you know where something went wrong, and you're like,
oh yeah,
like I can grow from this, you know?
Yeah, of course, for sure. But I mean, and that's just in general. I mean, it's always bumps and scrapes along the way. Each and every genre has its own like, oh, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? Why is that not working for anyone? And absolutely we've had that with this, and it's been able to inform us too, we hope, on some of the future hopes. But in general, like, you know, we like people reacting at the times you're kind of hoping they would react. You know, it's because they want it to be what it is. You know, if that makes any sense. I feel like that's been my experience with it.
Yeah, it feels like horror audiences are maybe the most passionate film fans that I've found, at least. Like, it seems like there's more cult followings of movies in horror than probably any other genre. I may be wrong, but that's what it feels like.
I think you might be correct on that. If Rocky Horror Picture Show is anything to look at, you know, it's everyone loves their films that have their little quirks, right? You know, everyone's going to try and go for a Rocky Horror or anything out of Cronenberg. You know, you're going to find stuff that's super, super interesting just to you and maybe a couple of friends. But then you hone in on that, you're going to find all the films that are similar to that. So yeah, awesome. Thank you guys. And then my last question for you guys is, what's next? What's coming up? What's down the pipeline for you?
You want to take that, Connor?
Yeah, we're right. Let's see, like literally right now, we're out with the feature, just, you know, to kind of taking it around right now, you know, and getting some reads and trying to put some pieces together, and you never know. But I think that you know, we got to a point with this where we felt like there was enough kind of excitement and positive reaction. One of the biggest reactions we had with this was like, you know, will there be a feature? Because, you know, what other, you know, aspects and scenarios can we explore, you know, with the concept? And so, you know, after enough of that kind of those confirmations, you know, got to work on kind of you know, same universe, you know, new characters, new location, you know, but the feature version. We don't, as far as, unless Sam wants to dispute this, we don't plan on acting, and we're not going to continue the acting and do the feature, but, you know, just stop, wait. Well, you know, but we're going to direct it like that. But anyway, yeah, right now we're trying to get the feature put together and see if we can get something moving.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's going on. And Connor has some other stuff in the works, and I do as well. But yeah, that's what's on the stove for now for Stay Calm.
Yeah, and let me just say too, you know, talking about indie filmmaking or rather starting filmmaking, I also feel pretty comfortable of all the different projects. We both have different things working right now. This is the one that I'm the most excited to kind of jump into in a fun way. Not to say that the other projects aren't fun, but they're definitely difficult. There's a lot of things that have to happen. Whereas this is like, wait, if we get to make it, of course, we get to go just like bloody up actors and go run around the desert for, you know, a few months. And so I would say that specifically with horror too, I think there's something really fun. There's always stress with filmmaking, but I think there's a lot of fun, I think, and excitement around what that could look like if this goes to the next stage. So I'm really excited about that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys, for your time. I really appreciate it, and I'm excited to screen Stay Calm at the Port of Fear Film Festival. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to be there with you guys, man.
Yeah,
awesome.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry we can't make it out, but we'll be there in spirit for sure.
100%.
You have to come out next year.
Yeah, 100%, dude.
All right, guys. Have a great rest of your day. I appreciate your time.
All right.
Thank you, David. Thank you, man.
David.